BYD just built a battery that charges to full in 9 minutes flat. And that's not a typo, that's not a concept car, and that's not a promise for 2030. That's right. Now, March 2026, available in production vehicles rolling off the line today. To put that in perspective, 9 minutes is less time than it takes to fill a tank of gas when there's one car ahead of you at the pump. You heard that right. The thing you thought EVs could never do, they just did faster than a gas station on a Tuesday morning. And if that wasn't enough, this same battery works at -30 degrees Fahrenheit without losing a single meaningful mile of range. The two arguments people have used against EVs for the last 15 years, slow charging and cold weather failure, were just answered at the same time by the same company with the same battery. But here's what almost nobody is talking about yet. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't a marketing stunt. This was 6 years of engineering work that the rest of the industry quietly believed was physically impossible. So before we go any further, let's start with why those two problems existed in the first place. Because once you understand what BYD was actually up against, what they pulled off becomes something else entirely. The two walls. You've felt it before, even if you've never owned an electric car. You're on a road trip, it's January. The temperature has dropped to the kind of cold that makes your face hurt the second you step outside, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet alarm goes off. What if I can't find a charger? What if I do find one, and it takes 45 minutes? What if this battery gives up on me before I get there? That feeling has a name: range anxiety. And for 15 years, it has been the single most powerful weapon in the argument against going electric. But here's what the car industry never told you. Straight range anxiety was never really about range. Most people drive less than 40 miles a day. A modern EV can handle that before breakfast. The real fear was always about two specific moments. The moment you plug in on a freezing morning and your battery has lost a third of its capacity overnight without you touching it. And the moment you're standing at a charger on a highway, watching a progress bar crawl from 30% to 80% while your coffee goes cold. Those two moments, cold weather failure and slow charging, became the walls that no amount of marketing could knock down, because they were real. They weren't myths. They weren't exaggerated by oil companies, though plenty of people tried to spin them that way. They were genuine, documented, repeatable failures that happened to real drivers in real conditions. And here's the tension nobody wanted to say out loud. The chemistry that makes lithium batteries safe is the same chemistry that makes them slow to charge and fragile in the cold. You couldn't fix one without making the other worse. Every engineer in the industry knew it. It was treated less like a problem waiting to be solved and more like a law of physics you simply had to work around. The entire EV world had accepted these two walls as permanent. But then, in a research facility in Shenzhen, a team of engineers decided they weren't. 6 years of silence. In 2020, while the rest of the world was still debating whether electric cars were even a serious industry, BYD quietly did something that almost nobody noticed. They pulled a small team of their best battery engineers off every public-facing project and pointed them at one internal objective: solve both problems at once, or don't come back with anything at all. No press releases, no teaser campaigns, no LinkedIn posts about exciting developments in battery technology, just silence. And that silence lasted 6 years. From the outside, BYD looked like a company focused on scaling production, expanding into new markets, and fighting for EV market share in China, which they were. But underneath all of that, in a facility most of their own employees had no access to, a team was working on something the broader industry had already written off as a dead end. Here's why that mattered. By 2021, the consensus among battery researchers, not just inside automakers, but in universities and independent labs, was that lithium iron phosphate chemistry had a ceiling. It was safer than other battery types, it was cheaper, it lasted longer. But it had hard physical limits on how fast it could accept a charge, and it got sluggish in cold temperatures in ways that other chemistries handled slightly better. The general conclusion was that you'd have to move away from LFP entirely if you wanted to break through those limits. BYD's team disagreed. And that disagreement cost them 6 years. But this was just the beginning of what they were actually building, because the battery was only one half of the equation. The other half was something even more ambitious, and most people still haven't connected the two pieces yet. Because while that engineering team was working in silence, a completely separate division inside BYD was quietly laying the groundwork for an infrastructure network so large it would make the battery's capabilities irrelevant unless you had somewhere to actually use them. And what they built alongside it changes everything. The original Blade battery. Before you can feel the weight of what BYD just announced, you need to understand what they were building on, because the second-generation Blade battery didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of one of the most quietly radical product launches in automotive history. In 2020, BYD introduced the first Blade battery, and the industry barely flinched. Which is strange, because what they actually did was rethink the entire physical structure of a battery pack from the ground up. Instead of stacking small cylindrical or pouch cells inside a module and then stacking modules inside a pack, BYD eliminated the middle step entirely. They made the cells long, flat, and structural like blades and slotted them directly into the pack itself, which then became part of the car's chassis. The result was a battery that was simultaneously safer, more energy-dense, and cheaper to produce than what anyone else was making at the time. The famous nail puncture test, where a spike is driven through a fully charged cell, produced no fire, no explosion, and barely any heat. Tesla's equivalent cell caught fire. That single demonstration did more for BYD's credibility than any marketing campaign could have. But here's the tension that first generation left on the table. The Blade battery was a structural masterpiece, and it solved the safety problem convincingly. What it didn't solve was speed. Charging it still took the better part of an hour, under ideal conditions. And in winter, ideal conditions don't exist. So while the world celebrated what BYD had built, the engineers who built it already knew it wasn't finished. The architecture was right. The chemistry still had walls around it. The first Blade battery proved BYD could out-engineer the competition on structure. The second generation was about proving they could out-engineer physics itself. And the moment that proof went public, the moment BYD walked onto a stage in March 2026 and showed the world what 6 years of silence had actually produced, the entire EV conversation changed in about 45 minutes. March 2026, the unveiling. Picture the scene. It's a Tuesday morning in Shenzhen. The auditorium is full of automotive journalists, investors, and engineers from competing companies who showed up partly out of curiosity and partly because they'd heard enough rumors to know they couldn't afford to miss it. BYD's executives take the stage, and within the first 5 minutes, the room goes very, very quiet. The number they lead with is 10. Not a range number, not a price point, a charging rate, 10C. If that means nothing to you yet, don't worry, it's about to mean everything. But in that room, among the people who understood battery chemistry well enough to know what a C rate was, 10C landed like a grenade. Because the best fast chargers available anywhere in the world at that moment were operating at somewhere between 4 and 5C. Tesla's Supercharger V3, the gold standard of public charging infrastructure, peaked at around 4.6C under perfect conditions. BYD had just announced a battery that could charge at more than double that rate. But this was just the beginning of what they put on that stage, because the 10C number, as jaw-dropping as it was, still felt abstract to most people in that room. So BYD translated it into something nobody could argue with. 9 minutes. At room temperature, with the right charger, you could take a Blade battery 2.0 from empty to full in 9 minutes. The tension in that room wasn't excitement, it was disbelief. Because every engineer sitting in those seats had spent years being told that number wasn't physically achievable without destroying the cell in the process. Heat builds up, ions move too fast. The structure degrades, you hit a wall. Everyone knew where the wall was. Except apparently BYD didn't build theirs there. And then they dropped the second number, -30 degrees Celsius, -22 degrees Fahrenheit, full performance. No preconditioning required, and the disbelief turned into something closer to silence. The room that walked in skeptical walked out, knowing the conversation had just changed permanently. But knowing a number and understanding how it was achieved are two very different things. What 10C actually means. Here's where most coverage of this announcement falls completely flat. They throw the number at you and move on. You deserve better than that, because once you actually understand what 10C means in terms you can feel, the achievement stops being a statistic and starts being something that rewires how you think about electric cars entirely. C rate is how fast a battery charges or discharges relative to its total capacity. A 1C rate means you're filling the entire battery in 1 hour. A 2C rate means 30 minutes. So when you follow that math to 10C, you land at 6 minutes for a full charge under laboratory conditions and 9 minutes in real-world production use, which is where BYD is actually claiming it. Now compare that to your daily life. The average gas station fill-up, from the moment you pull up to the pump to the moment you pull away, takes between 4 and 7 minutes depending on your tank size and the pump speed. BYD just built an EV that charges faster than that. Not close to that, faster. You heard that right. Plugging in your electric car is now quicker than stopping for gas. But here's the tension buried inside that number that nobody is talking about loudly enough. Charging a battery at 10C generates enormous heat. Heat is what kills battery cells. Heat causes degradation, capacity loss, and in extreme cases, thermal runaway, which is the technical term for what happens right before a battery catches fire. Every previous attempt to push LFP chemistry past 5 or 6C ran directly into this wall. The faster you pushed electrons in, the hotter the cell got, and the more you damaged it in the process. So the real question, the one that separates a genuine breakthrough from a marketing claim, isn't whether BYD hit 10C once in a lab. It's whether they did it without cooking the cell. It's whether that battery still holds its full capacity after 1,000 fast charges. It's whether the thermal management system they built is actually solving the heat problem or just delaying it. And that answer lives inside the engineering, which is exactly where we're going next. Engineering the impossible. Here's what BYD actually changed inside the cell, because this is where the 6 years of silence paid off in ways that should genuinely impress you even if chemistry isn't your thing. The core problem with fast-charging LFP batteries has always been ion movement. When you charge a battery, lithium ions travel from one electrode to the other through a liquid electrolyte. Push them too fast, and two things happen simultaneously. Heat spikes, and the ions start plating on the surface of the anode instead of inserting cleanly into it. That plating is called lithium dendrite formation, and it's essentially the battery slowly destroying itself from the inside every time you fast charge it. BYD's team attacked this from 3 directions at once. First, they redesigned the anode material at a microscopic level, creating a surface structure with more entry points so ions could insert faster without piling up at the door. Second, they reformulated the electrolyte itself to move ions more efficiently at high speeds without breaking down chemically under the heat. Third, and this is the part that makes the whole thing work, they embedded a thermal management layer directly into the cell structure, not around it, inside it, so heat is pulled away from the reaction zone in real time rather than after it builds up. The result is a cell that handles 10C the way a highway handles traffic when every on-ramp is wide open, fast, controlled, and without the pileup that causes the damage. But here's the tension that still exists even with all of that solved. None of it matters if the charger on the other end can't deliver the power fast enough to actually use it. A 10C battery sitting next to a standard public charger is still going to take 40 minutes. The battery broke through its own wall, but the infrastructure wall was still standing. And that wall is exactly what BYD built their second announcement around, because the battery was never meant to exist alone. Cold weather finally solved. If you live anywhere north of the 45th parallel, think Canada, the northern United States, Scandinavia, northern China, this section is the one that was written for you specifically. Cold weather has been the quiet deal breaker for EV adoption in northern climates for as long as EVs have existed, not because people don't want electric cars, But because standing in a parking lot at -22 degrees Fahrenheit watching your range estimate drop 40% before you've driven a single mile is not a minor inconvenience, it's a betrayal. And it's happened to enough real people in enough real winters that the reputation stuck hard. Here's why it happens. Lithium ions move through the electrolyte, and cold temperatures thicken that electrolyte, slowing ion movement dramatically. The battery doesn't lose energy. The energy is still there, but it can't deliver or accept that energy at normal rates because the medium it travels through has essentially become sluggish. Most EVs compensate by preconditioning the battery, running a heating cycle before you drive, which works, but costs you range, takes time, and requires you to remember to do it. BYD's solution didn't warm the electrolyte from the outside. They changed what the electrolyte was made of, a new low-viscosity formulation that stays fluid and responsive at -30 degrees Celsius, -22 Fahrenheit, without any preconditioning at all. Combined with the embedded thermal layer from the fast-charging architecture, the battery maintains consistent ion movement, regardless of what the air temperature is doing around it. The real-world result is a battery that performs at -22 Fahrenheit as reliably as it does at 68 degrees on a mild spring morning. No range penalty, no warming cycle, no anxiety. For Canadian drivers specifically, this isn't a feature. This is the feature. The one that removes the last geography-based argument against going electric entirely. But the cold weather fix and the fast-charging breakthrough only matter if you can actually find a charger capable of delivering what this battery can handle. And that problem, the infrastructure gap, is what BYD was building their answer to in parallel the entire time. 20,000 stations. This is the part of the story that almost nobody has connected to the battery announcement yet, and it's arguably more important than the battery itself. BYD isn't just building a faster battery. They are simultaneously deploying 20,000 flash charging stations across 297 cities in China, with a global rollout targeted for the end of 2026. 20,000 stations. You heard that right. That's roughly 4 times the number of Tesla supercharger locations that exist in the entire United States right now, being built by a single company in a single deployment cycle. But the number isn't even the most significant part. The architecture is. BYD's flash charging network is being built as an open ecosystem. Any EV, any brand, any manufacturer can plug into it and use it. This isn't a proprietary network designed to sell more BYD cars the way Tesla's supercharger network was originally designed. This is infrastructure as a platform, and the strategic implication of that decision is enormous. Here's the tension it creates for every other automaker. If BYD's open network becomes the dominant fast-charging standard, and at 20,000 stations, it has the scale to do exactly that. Then, the charging experience of every competitor's EV becomes partially dependent on infrastructure BYD controls. That's not just a battery win. That's a position of structural power over the entire industry's user experience. And BYD has priced access to make adoption easy, because the goal isn't revenue from charging fees. The goal is making the flash charging standard the default. The goal is making 9-minute charging the expectation every EV driver has, regardless of what car they're sitting in. Once that expectation is set, every automaker selling a car that takes 45 minutes to charge is going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with their customers. But the infrastructure rollout raises one more question that viewers in North America, Europe, and beyond are already asking: when does this reach my city? The global rollout. BYD has confirmed that the global rollout of both the second-generation Blade battery and the flash charging network is targeted for the end of 2026. That timeline is aggressive, and it's worth understanding what it actually means for you depending on where you live. In China, the infrastructure is already being built. The 297 cities in the current deployment map cover the vast majority of China's urban population, which means for hundreds of millions of people, 9-minute charging isn't a future promise, it's a this-year reality. For North America and Europe, the picture is more complex. BYD is pursuing a licensing strategy that allows partner automakers and charging networks to adopt the flash charging standard rather than requiring BYD to build every station itself. Think of it like the way USB-C became a universal standard not because one company built every port, but because enough manufacturers agreed it was the right architecture and adopted it independently. The tension here is timing. Licensing deals take negotiation. Infrastructure partnerships require regulatory approval in different markets. And there are players in the North American charging space, including some with significant political and financial incentive to slow adoption of a Chinese standard who will not make this transition easy or fast. But here's the payoff that cuts through all of that friction. The battery itself doesn't require BYD's network to demonstrate its value. Any high-output charger that can deliver the required power level will trigger the 9-minute performance. The infrastructure accelerates adoption. It doesn't gate it. Which means the moment a BYD vehicle with the second-generation Blade battery is available in your market, and that moment is coming before the end of 2026, the 9-minute charge is real for you, today, wherever you are. And that brings you to the only question left worth asking. What's your excuse now? For 15 years, the argument against buying an electric car had two load-bearing pillars: slow charging and cold weather failure. Not prices came down, not ranges went up. Those two specific, lived, real-world failure points were the ones that kept millions of people from making the switch. And they were legitimate. Nobody was wrong for pointing at them. They were real problems that real drivers experienced in real conditions, and no amount of enthusiasm from EV advocates could make them disappear. But here's where you are, right now, today, in 2026. One company spent 6 years in silence, attacked both problems simultaneously from the inside out, reformulated the chemistry, restructured the cell architecture, embedded thermal management directly into the reaction zone, and came out the other side with a battery that charges to full in 9 minutes and performs without penalty at -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Then that same company announced they were building 20,000 fast charging stations across 297 cities on an open platform any EV can use, and confirmed the rest of the world gets it before the year is out. Both pillars are gone, not weakened, not worked around, gone. And this is the moment that should feel uncomfortable for anyone who has been sitting on the fence, because the fence itself just disappeared. The rational objections have been answered. The engineering that everyone said was impossible has been demonstrated in production hardware on a stage in front of the entire industry. The infrastructure to support it is being physically built right now, city by city, station by station, at a scale no single company has attempted before. So the question you're left with isn't really about batteries anymore. It's about you. It's about whether the reasons you've been carrying around are still reasons, or whether they became excuses somewhere along the way without you noticing. 9 minutes, -22 degrees Fahrenheit, 20,000 stations, an open network, a global rollout by end of year. BYD didn't just build a better battery. They dismantled the last credible argument against going electric, and they did it all at once. The only question left is whether you were waiting for a reason to switch, or whether you were just waiting to run out of reasons not to.